today is February 1st. Time flies. All right, so January's already done. Today we're going to talk a little bit about innovation and competition in the managing the startup enterprise class, as I like to call it, from concept to reality. And so a little bit of housekeeping. As I said, this course outline was more of a roadmap, not a blueprint. So we're doing quite well. Historically, when I forecasted this, I thought we'd be talking marketing, technology, and getting to product and service next class. But we actually did all that last week. So we're ahead, which is good. It's always good to be ahead of forecasts. So today we're going to talk a little bit about strategy and competition by looking at a case study. But when we go through it, you guys obviously have to apply it to your world. We'll get to that in a second. In the classes to come, we'll look at sales. We'll look at legal. And then we'll look at M&A, and that's where we're going to touch on corporate venture capital, which one of our teammates brought up earlier in the class. I inserted it there. Also, another housekeeping item. One of our fellow classmates let me know that class should end at 9:55, not 10. And I'm sorry for that. So I'll make sure that I'll let you guys out at 9:55. That is a good example of getting participation marks. That's actually good feedback, right? I mean, try to be accommodating and then I kind of ensure you guys get your next classes late. Not cool. So that's really good feedback. Please don't hesitate to let me know stuff like that. And I know that today is the deadline to submit that one-pager. I apologize, I was late to getting the one-liners for each one. I was thinking about it this weekend, and then finally I sent that to Elias this morning. He's going to update them. He and I are going to discuss kind of the grading evaluation specifics. I actually think it's good for us to look at some of the submissions. I know I got at least one. And then we'll kind of get to those pretty quickly. Otherwise, yeah, if there are no other questions, we could, yes, there's a question. Yeah, so the question was, could we go above the one-pager? Absolutely. I think I was just trying to give you guys like a yardstick, like don't send in a 10-pager, you know, it's just, but 1 page, 2 page, even 3 page, it's whatever makes sense. You know what I mean? Like if you need a couple pages to convey what you're describing, take a couple pages. If you are like, you know, less is more these days in this clutter attention economy, if you need half a page, better be good, but you could use half a page. So it's, we're not militant about those things. Cool. So that's that. And then let's just jump into innovation. So there's a saying like, your profit margin is my opportunity. You know, historically, I always say, when it comes to cost, I think like low enough is good enough. Because if you squeeze, you know, on your employees' necks and you try to screw your suppliers on a Donald Trump, that's not stakeholder management, that's not sustainable. There's like a debt that comes back like a boomerang and nails you. And it's the same thing with revenue. Sometimes if you try to maximize your revenue potential, you're not maximizing your market share, you're really hurting yourself, right? So innovation in a vacuum is very much philosophical, but we're going to kind of get into an industry that I know quite well and discuss innovation, which basically, I call it, it's like when disruptors get disrupted, right? So you got to innovate or you die. And when you talk about innovation, talking disruption, eventually you talk consolidation. And one of the, let's actually go here, one of the foundational books, I call the books I've pretended to read, like these are obviously books that I've either read partially or am familiar with, but this is a book like in my library that is there, you know, The Innovators Dilemma by Harvard professor Clayton Christensen. He basically discussed this concept of the Innovators Dilemma in a 1995 article, Disruptive Technologies Catching the Wave. And then he followed it up, obviously, with a book. subtitled, When New Technologies Cause Great Firms to Fail. New Yorker called it the most influential business thinker on earth, called him. And yeah, I mean, this is basically like the linchpin of innovation and disruption. And it looks at a lot of companies that had a dominant position and failed to stay either nimble, agile, risk-taking culture, and got disrupted by like a hungrier, faster, quicker, smaller contestant. Yeah, that goes back, like let's say you got IBM crushing it, making a ton of money in the mainframe world, and then you get a Microsoft or you get the Dells coming and they seem like, oh, this is too small, it's too boring for us. You're laughed at, not to paraphrase Gandhi in the context of business, but it's like first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, they ridicule you, and the next thing you know, they're actually afraid of you. So this is kind of like it's happened forever, and it happens to everybody. I reference this all the time to my team. If you don't innovate, you die. And it has everything to do with the company and product life cycle, the introduction, the growth, maturity, decline. Now, you might be thinking, I don't get it. We're like a concept. We want to take this concept and turn it to reality. Yes, right now you're in the introduction, but you have to find companies that are either really growing or mature, stabilizing, or in decline, because those are areas that you actually have huge opportunities. Covered this very, very transparently and painstakingly last year. There was a period I was into these doodles and drawings, I guess. And I kind of compare actually a person's life stage, a product and a company's. And, you know, at first you're agile, you're young. Eventually you start to kind of become more, you know, thoughtful about things. You network a bit better. And over time you kind of clam up and get tired of society. But I kind of break down how you're balancing fear and greed. Oh yeah, this is actually an interesting article. These financials are not ours, but they're based a little bit on our trajectory. And I kind of talk about these two firms, XYZ and ABC. And as you can see at first, you know, things start picking up, your revenues grow, you're feeling good about yourself. But then eventually, as your costs go up, your revenue starts to hit a wall. You're in yellow, your profits kind of get flat or even fall. There's two ways to react. If you don't reinvest and grow, what happens? Your organization gets fat and your costs, it's hard to then reduce your costs as everybody gets more complacent and lazy and you can't find new revenue. And then you go from being profitable, you start losing money again. But then the companies that stand the test of time, ABC in this case, when they are in a fork in the road, they actually reinvest. And what happens is, look at that. They get the second wind in their back. Those costs, those investments, some of them pay off, and the company finds a growth trajectory again. And this happened to us. 2006 to 2012, investment period. 2013 to 2016, rocket ship years. 2017, 18, 19, our revenues were basically flat. It was frustrating, but our costs went up because I kept reinvesting. As I said, I went from being visionary Ash, stupid Ash, brilliant Ash, idiotic Ash, same guy. But you know, there's always criticism that comes. But we had record years in 2020, 2021 because of the tough decision in 2017 to reinvest. And basically, if you then compare what WatchMojo ended up doing in blue versus what it could have done in red if I would have just not wanted to reinvest, it really compared. And I kind of said, look at that green. That green is basically having the courage, the confidence, and the conviction to reinvest and drown out the noise. We basically went from a shrinking business to a revitalized business again, right? And so you could argue, Ash, I don't get it. Your business, okay, 15 years. I mean, that's actually a very long time in the internet, but cycles happen really, really quickly. And the case study we're going to look at speaks to that. Now, of course, you have to understand, like, you know, that you could invest internally or externally, and we're going to talk about all the ways you could grow organically and inorganically. So yeah, so we'll get into this. And knowing me, obviously, I had to break it down in terms of the virtues and the sins with regards to how some companies just fail to, find that growth curve again. So ultimately, your biggest advantage as a startup is like that the biggest competition you face are going to become increasingly risk averse. They're going to take a safe playbook. And frankly, there's this line that I love: instead of risking anything new, let's play it safe by continuing our slow decline into obsolescence, right? Quite true. If Viacom, MTV, VH1 viewed YouTube as the future, they would have taken all their content, cut it up, put it on YouTube. But fear and greed and many other things, sloth, gluttony, whatever you want to call it, led them to say, no, we're not going to basically put our content on YouTube. Great, thank you. Let me buy you a drink. Opened up a vacuum, WatchMojo filled it. So the way I view innovation at WatchMojo is I love my team, and they've developed into formidable executives, but a lot of them, not only I recruited out of school young, but they didn't have any business background or training, which could be a good and bad thing. So sometimes when I came to them and I threw out these crazy ideas, I realized, well, no, it's like Animal Farm. All ideas are equal, but some are more equal than others. Some are almost what I call foundational. It's like built on your core. It's a derivative of core. There's not really much different than what you're doing. Oh, you're Dunkin' Donuts? Now you have a chocolate donut. You have a maple donut. It's the same thing. It's sugar. Not really different. But if you're Dunkin' Donuts and now you're like, hey, I'm going to sell coffee. Or Tim Hortons, I'm now going to add sandwiches. You're starting to get a little bit away from your core, but sometimes it's iterative. When we launched Miss Mojo, we had people out with pitchforks at first saying, why are you gendering and why do you have this version? I said, no. You may be offended. I got 2 daughters. If one of them likes Megadeth and the other one likes One Direction, it's all good. It's fine. I'm not telling them you cannot listen to Metallica and you have to like Pink. That's not what I'm saying. But historically, media has basically launched Mademoiselle and Elle, and there are topics that over a large population tend to be more of interest to a given demographic, right? So when we launched Miss Mojo, it was very iterative. We took our formula and we said, now we're going to target a female demo. And sure, the LGBT proportion will probably be higher on Miss Mojo than WatchMojo, because historically, that's how media has worked. A lot of data, not saying anything shocking. When we launched WatchMojo Espanol, same thing. We took the content, we changed the language. When we launched on Snap, same content, we just edited it a bit differently. But then there's certain things that become a bit more evolutionary, right? So evolutionary is like when we launch a game show. Okay, it's factual, but ultimately doing a top 10 list, top 10 Batman series is very different than building the next generation of Jeopardy or Family Feud. So that I personally put it in evolutionary. And technically any project could always fall into, 2 buckets. That's the whole point. And then there's revolutionary. For us, revolutionary is not sending ships out to Mars. Admittedly, for us, a revolutionary could be getting into scripted. Like last year, we developed an animated show for adults. Think of like something like The Simpsons. When we pitched that to Amazon Prime, when we pitched that to Nickelodeon, they were a bit shocked. They were like, oh, I thought you guys just did top 10. I'm like, well, you assume people just have, vanilla, but there's other things. So we could get into technology, right? And then also some of these things are things that you could do organically inside the company. And some of them could be inorganic, which means you're buying something externally, right? So Jack Welch, a flawed character. I don't like to speak ill of the dead. So I'll emphasize that he was actually picked by Fortune as the manager of the century when he ran General Electric. His nickname was Neutron Jack. He would basically buy a company, fire all the people, but the buildings would stay intact, as if a neutron bomb had hit that building. He emphasized shareholder mindset. He could care less about the community. And At the end of the 20th century, in the late 90s, it was Wall Street's greed is good period. That's kind of what the street liked. He was widely known for saying, unless you're number one or number two in your market, you got to get out. That's something that you guys actually have to ask yourself. If there's 6 apps that do something, you don't necessarily on the internet have to be 1 or 2, but you have to be 1 or 2 in some way. Either 1 or 2 for a given demo, 1 or 2 in a given region, geography, right? But if you're the 17th company doing buy now, pay later, yeah, it's hard to be differentiated. So a lot of you send me these ideas sometimes and I like them, but what do I tend to respond? Show me a competitive landscape. I'm going to talk about that answer. You can lose an audience really quickly. One thing that I liked about Jack Welch was he did really put an emphasis on people and competition. Ultimately, entrepreneurs are competitors. We like to compete and we like to bring people together, right? That's a big part of what we do. And Jack Welch was weird as an individual because he was so flawed. And as I was finishing business school, I remember going, yeah, I don't know if a corporate life is for me because I wouldn't do a lot of the stuff that he does. Now, that doesn't mean he was good or bad. It just means people are nuanced. That's why I go, the answer is usually, it depends. You got to find the good, but you don't want to take all of the bad either. But in any case, in 1999, he was the gold standard. And I remember something that I found incredibly stupid. That's the hashtag I created for that. It's when I was in college, he was getting close to his retirement. And it was like almost like Donald Trump apprentice reality TV show-esque that he said, when I retire, I'm going to pick my heir apparent, my successor amongst 3 individuals, Jeff Immelt, Bob Nardelli, and Jim McNerney. He picked Jeffrey Immelt, who was a very smart fella. And GE's market cap ended up going from 400 billion in 2011 to 280 billion whenever this article was published in 2015, and now it's even less. And GE Capital, which was this brilliant thing that led to all the profits, turned out to be a bit of a fraud, kind of a house of cards. So he let a lot of institutional knowledge out the door in Nardelli, who ended up going to Home Depot, and McNerney, who went to 3M and eventually Boeing. And long story short, yes, I'm sure McNerney and Nardelli did not want to stick around and be number 2 and number 2A or number 2B. But you also, as a leader, sometimes have to make sure you don't let talent walk out the door, right? So I always found that very weird. And I always found it even weirder that the media never pointed that out until much later on, 15 years later. But in 1999, I had to go look in like the archives of Fortune to find this article. It's like it's been scrubbed. He was basically like the manager of the year, went on and on, but it was all about shareholder mindset, which is frankly rather destructive because it's an extreme philosophy, right? You need to be a bit more balanced. I'm not saying you need to sit out there, eat the granola in your Berks and, not care about the bottom line, but you can't be extreme and disregard community employees just for your shareholders. And then womp, 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 Fortune made a turnaround and said, sorry, Jack, your rules for winning don't work anymore. And this was recently last year in 2020. And not surprisingly, GE fell from grace. GE, which when I was in school was like the Google, it was the Apple. That's where everybody wanted to go work. By the way, talking about not wearing your ambition on your sleeve, when I interviewed for GE, first of all, the academic advisor whose job was supposedly to help all students, it was like, I wasn't told that they were coming to campus. So that's already a great introduction to how the world works. But then once I found out like how to apply, I went there and the 2 ladies who were interviewing me, they're like, why should we hire you? And like an idiot, I don't know what I was trying to accomplish. I said, well, Jack Welch is resigning this year and his successor is being chosen as we speak. In 20 years, I'll replace that guy and you guys could say that you found me type of thing. It wasn't that crazy, but it was basically what I said. They were like, great, Thank you for coming. We'll call you back. I wasn't out the door. They were already shredding my resume. Anyway. What can I say? Don't wear your ambition on your sleeve. Anyway, thank God I did not end up at GE because they would basically send you to industry, some plant in Alberta. They'd send you to GE Capital, some back office in Laval, and then you just rotated until you either died or whatnot. Sorry. And the bottom line is for you guys, why am I driving this home? You need to look at the competition a lot more than you are probably looking at the competition. And you need to find out their solids. Where is the souffle? When you poke it, the chocolate comes out. That's where you got to focus on. If a company is doing crazy amount of profits, what do they say in economics? Profits, abnormal profits, attract competition. So the bigger you are, the harder it is to pivot and adjust, and that creates an opportunity for you. This is a slide, I guess, that I was commenting on COVID, and everybody was going really crazy on New Zealand, whose leader was kick-ass and doing a great job. But it was, again, very weird that people did not point out that, like, well, New Zealand is an island in the middle of nowhere, kind of easier for them to manage COVID than America. But in any case, it was also that it was small. That's the point I was getting. You got to use your size as an advantage early on. And there's a lot of case studies. Blockbuster. This visual effect, everything is hyperlinked. It's kind of crazy. You look at Blockbuster, that within a generation, so I was 8-ish, 9, 10 then, so Blockbuster was a thriving, growing. Does anybody remember Blockbuster? No? Okay, so Blockbuster was like Netflix in the physical world. You went there with your card on Friday, bought your popcorn, rented your movies, and then you go home and watch them, and then you bring them back. Anyway, so Blockbuster was growing. And then at some point, it had 4,000 stores. It already is going down here, but no, 6,000. At some point, it was a big deal in the early 2000s, but then there was a new kid in town named Netflix that changed it. So change sucks, but irrelevance is worse. And frankly, it's not just Blockbuster. Here is Tower Records. Where's the tower, right? So every business is exposed to this reality. As a good entrepreneur, I'm always paranoid that WatchMojo. I'm like, what if the kids don't care about WatchMojo? This is why, as much as many companies don't like to hire kids, I'm like, I'll take them all. Because we got to find out, what are the kids watching? What are they doing? If it was up to me, we'd only be producing Ozzy Osbourne and Seinfeld lists, which obviously is not the future. So innovation, competition go hand in hand. Again, when you are asked about the competition, it's very different who is asking you. If you're talking to employees, if you are recruiting, before COVID, your competition was regional in some ways, right? Like if somebody comes to work for WatchMojo, they may also be considering going to work for the Montreal Gazette. That's kind of like the way you have to frame it. Why would you come work for me? Obviously, with COVID, somebody could go work for BuzzFeed. They're in New York, broadly speaking. Audiences and users, very different. People put us in the same bucket as Vice and BuzzFeed. Yeah, we're not Vice. We're not producing news. We're not producing what BuzzFeed is producing. Clients, when you go talk to an ad agency, very different. We stick to our endemic vertical. So we pitch to Netflix, Sony, Lionsgate, Universal. But if we all of a sudden want to go pitch Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola is talking to everybody. So all of a sudden they're like, why should we spend money with you and not ESPN, which is like a sports thing? So be careful if you open up the battleground when you're chasing for dollars and revenues, who are you being benchmarked to? And then M&A and investors. You're going to be talking to a lot of investors. They are looking at the market broadly in terms of stages, industry, and they're talking to your competitors, right? And they will not sign NDAs and they don't care. So you have to kind of always understand the context. So we're going to look a little bit at the world of streaming, which is obviously a world that I've worked in. But every slide, there should be something that you adapt to your business, your product, right? So at a very high level, what's happening in streaming is really kind of, it captures, I guess, the ethnocentrism of Western view, where we assume, yeah, people hate ads and everybody's got all this discretionary income. Everybody will pay $10 a month for Netflix. Well, there's a lot of places, even in North America, in Canada, but especially in emerging places where nobody has $10 a month lying around. They're struggling to buy food and groceries and gas, and heck, they don't even have shelter. So as much as, yes, there's an opportunity in subscription, ad-supported media has always existed, and it will always exist. And the world is being splintered, right? There's America and the rest of the world, and that was more pronounced during Donald Trump's regime. There's a difference between rich and poor, English, non-English. And these are also levers that you have to look at the world and the opportunity. And so in its own little weird way, what's happened in streaming capture that. Free entertainment online, propelled by YouTube, basically replaced television in a decade. Not even in a decade, I'd say 5 years. 2006, YouTube launched. By 2011, it was kind of lights out. It was clear that YouTube had won. Everybody fell asleep at the wheel. And it was generating, this is back in 2017, 1 billion hours of video consumption a day, eclipsing television. And then advertising changed, right? Advertising funds all that, and everybody's always talked about the death of the 30-second ad spot. Now, the whole point of a 30-second ad spot in between the show you're watching is that it's disruptive, right? So nobody really wakes up and says, I really want to see your ad. Yeah, okay, maybe at the Super Bowl there's some cool ads, but generally speaking, your marketing messages, nobody cares about them. So you have to kind of think of a way that make them engaging, informative, entertaining in this backdrop that, okay, consumer behavior is changing, and it's not just a 30-second ad spot. So I always break things down into either revolutionary or evolutionary. YouTube, their ad format called TrueView, skippable ads, was really revolutionary. Anybody care to guess why? What are the two most important words on the screen? Skip ad. It's like an order. Thou shalt not watch this ad, right? I remember sitting with YouTube's competitors in San Fran having lunch, and the CEO of Dailymotion, of MetaCafe was like, goddamn YouTube. I'm like, why? He's like, we're all starving for ad dollars. These bastards are basically telling people, skip the ad. So if users skip the ad on YouTube, they expect to skip the ad on MetaCafe. And when I go to talk to advertisers, they're like, do you have skippable ads? They're forcing the market. It was scorched earth. It was brilliant. YouTube had all the money from their sugar daddy, Google. And they basically said, yeah, you know what? Let's just be greedy long-term. But let's change the market. Let's condition users like the puppies that we are to not want to sit through ads. But then those who do sit through ads, charge those at a premium. But also, when our competition, Microsoft, AOL, Yahoo, MetaCafe, Dailymotion, Crapster, anybody goes and talks to Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola is going to say, well, YouTube just left the building and they only charge us on ads people watch. You guys offer that too, right? So all these other companies struggling, bandwidth fees, hosting fees, YouTube totally changed the market. It was brilliant. So in my opinion, and I've said this for a decade, who here says YouTube is revolutionary? Who here says Netflix is revolutionary? Which one seemed more revolutionary? Show of hands. Netflix is revolutionary. Who agrees? Few hands. YouTube is revolutionary. Look, it's all relative. If I had to pick one, I find YouTube is more revolutionary because YouTube changed the definition of quality, the definition of talent, the creator economy. Any person in their basement could be a celebrity. The way the content was shot, you know, the style, the pace. Netflix took content that we were watching on TV and theaters and just brought it to you. Super convenient, kind of evolutionary. And this number is outdated. Bad Ash. It's like 200 million calling that. Yeah, this number is super outdated. Sorry. And YouTube has 2 billion users. And their success woke up traditional media. And it's funny, because these companies are not that disruptive anymore. In a matter of a few years, this is the norm. There's a video I did. If anybody cares when I share this, you could click and watch. Today, YouTube would be worth $500 billion to $750 billion. Netflix, the stock fell under 200 billion. It'll go back up. But the point is, free entertainment information, huge business, but a volume business. So if your model is based on a free model, you need gazillions of people. And so even though there are more subscription-based entertainment and information sources, and some users now spend more time on those, there's more ad dollars that are being spent on media. That should be screaming, ding, 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 like that is a huge opportunity. More ad dollars being shoved in, relatively speaking, less places. What happens, demand and supply? Prices go up. So this disconnect between demand and supply and where people spend their time and where ad dollars are flowing, massive opportunity. Remember this? I think like when it comes to top 10 things I repeat in this class, this is up there. There's also my favorite movie producer I know. No. So this you've seen, right? This was the first time I doodled this. Eventually it looked a bit snazzier. So one day in about 2020, I was writing something, more propaganda. And I was like, this is not really true anymore. The whole theory here is that there's this opportunity because traditional media has not embraced the internet. I was like, yeah, maybe to an old guy. Oh, you want to know what my daughter said? She was like, I'm a Bengals fan, since don't ask why. So she was like, you should be very happy. Cincinnati's going to the Super Bowl. I'm like, yeah. She's like, and these old rappers you listen to are going to be performing at halftime. I'm like, old rappers? What are you talking about? But in any case, to an old guy like me at 43, this is the world that I started my career building WatchMojo. Ton of ad dollars flowing here, not a lot of super premium content, and way too much UGC that at the time was worth a warm bucket of spit. At the time I started WatchMojo, advertisers hated UGC. But my buddy John, who started Jukin Media, he would disagree with this, and I would disagree with this now. Jukin Media has Fail Army. It's basically a modern day version of America's Funniest Home Videos. Super valuable because decision makers are different. Remember I said who your audience is? Marketers who grew up on the internet are like, no, UGC is fine, within reason. So I was like, yeah, this doesn't really make sense anymore because also, what is Disney doing? Disney blew up its business model embracing the internet. NBC Comcast is literally in a like gun battle with AMC, the theater company, saying, yeah, we're going straight to the internet. So you got to adapt your playbook as well. So I said, yeah, you know what? We've moved from this new world order, that pyramid, to these spheres that, like an eclipse, are becoming one. Another diagram. You see, you guys were saying, look at the diagram. Yeah, I like these diagrams. Give me a pen and a paper. So this is basically content and distribution, content and audience. Content is king. Without distribution, blah, blah, blah. Basically, historically, you had arms dealers, content creators like Viacom, MTV, VH1, Paramount, who would create content and sell it to others. And then on the other side, you had these distribution platforms that had massive audiences like Facebook and Twitch, TikTok, Snap. Apple has 700 million people that pay it a month for one service or another. iTunes, je ne sais quoi. That's a lot of people. And so what's happening is the content owners like Disney, NBC, HBO are buying or investing, disrupting themselves into audience plays. Because one without the other is kind of hard. And then the distribution platforms are either licensing, like Google. YouTube does not want to be in the originals business. They just do a license with us. Or underwriting, when Facebook meets with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith and goes, hey, let's do this Red Table Talks. We'll give you $1 million for a couple shows. they're basically ordering that content. It's not like theirs, but it's Apple TV is paying for the production of shows. Hello Sunshine has Good Morning with Reese Witherspoon, Ted Lasso. So that's Apple. Like, that's surprising that these companies, and by the way, my business plans in 2006, the names were different. Yeah, it wasn't clairvoyant. I didn't talk about TikTok, but I was like, yeah, AOL, Yahoo, MSN, these companies with distribution will eventually differentiate themselves through content, whether they buy, license, invest, that will be how they differentiate. And I was like, it's happening. So I started this. And if I was an animator, these would basically merge into like an eclipse, where that's what's happening. All these companies end up owning content, the distribution guys, and then all the content guys that become the strongest end up. And what's also happening, this other wave of disruption, is how ads are bought. You no longer really hire salespeople. There's probably 10 businesses in all of America that should have their own sales force. Google, YouTube, Time Warner. But like WatchMojo having your own sales force, you don't have the scale. We tried it, we experimented, we have a couple of salespeople, but it's not the core revenue driver. Why? Because programmatic targeting of users through things like behavioral data, et cetera, is becoming a bigger part of the ad pie. Huge amount of disruption. And so today, the distribution pipelines have been built. It's really hard to knock off Google or YouTube. Consumer behavior has changed, and dollars are flowing from TV to digital. And in some ways, content is the new software because the marginal cost of production and distribution is close to zero, which is why historically content was a great business, software was a great business. And basically, these are some nice little lines about just how AVOD ad supported is huge and something you should look out for. So always researching paradox. This is from another slide. You know, ultimately, success is 20% what you do, 80% what you avoid from doing. Like, it's really is the discipline not to go do stupid shit. Okay? But there's still that 20% of things you've got to do. We've talked about how entrepreneurship and all of, all quest for successes and all that is driven through insecurities, and businesses are insecure. Google, super insecure company. YouTube lives in fear, once upon a time, of Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, what if he throws all his money at Facebook Watch? Amazon invested in Vessel. Vessel doesn't even exist anymore. TikTok, which is a real threat. So companies, your competitors, the companies that you are effectively basing your product and business on, have all these insecurities. And the main thing for you is, like, competition is multidimensional. You'll be competing for talent, you'll be competing for ad dollars, you'll be competing for investors. And in a way, you need a different playbook for each, right? Like, how I am with competitors, kind of different than how I am with employees, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody was asking me, saying I have basically a job interview. What should I ask the founder CEO? I'm like, well, if it's day one, there are certain questions you can ask yourself today that would be kind of rude if you're standing at the altar about to say I do. So ask as many questions as you like, respectfully, in a humble way. But now's the time to ask them, like, yeah, what's your runway? Are you going to go out of business? What's your revenue model? You can't ask that necessarily when you're day 5. You could, but the tone and the context is very different, right? Yes, question. So when we looked at like the mental well-being over the decade, let's say YouTube was tough. And sometimes I needed to reach out to a rights holder and say, hey, okay, perfect example. Warner Music, like Madonna's label here, Metallica, like the Warner Music, wanted to go more into consumer. They didn't want to just be a label. They wanted to own brands, own assets. I knew an executive there. He was like, we would like to buy WatchMojo. So we're having that conversation. Warner's marketing team was always doing promos with us. But there was a rights department that used Google's Content ID that would always issue strikes against us. So there's like an element of right hand not talking to the left hand. I could have gone public and really exposed the hypocrisy. But I was like, okay, pissing off a bunch of really, really confident, proud, we all have ego, like pissing off these super powerful people, and effectively, inadvertently, even if it's self-preserving and to protect my employees, is probably going to backfire. But how do I get this department to stop hammering us? So concurrently, I said, instead of just pressing record and going on the blitz, where I would get near term what I want, the CEO yells at somebody to go tell the rights department, this is embarrassing. We cannot be abusing a tool when we are not just partnering with them officially, but showing an interest to buy. But I was like, these guys are not stopping. And I sent them Van Halen, also a Warner label. I sent them the Fair Warning album cover saying, this is your last warning. You're forcing me to do something that you're not gonna like. They were like, whatever, let's laugh at the kid with the big long name from Montreal. Okay, so I emailed the CEO and I highlighted all this, but it was still private. But I knew that somebody would be doing a lot of yelling. I then prepared a video where it was like Seinfeld Festivus. It was an errands of grievances. And I explained all this, but in an entertaining way. I said it on our YouTube channel, unlisted. I will share it with all of you. It is a chef-d'oeuvre. But I hesitated from actually releasing it. Yet I know ironic that I'm talking about it now, but this is therapy. But by sending the video unlisted, so they're already a bit nervous, I mean, because it's out there, but you can't find it unless you share the link, and emailing the CEO, the chief counsel got back to me and said, okay, like, thank you for bringing this, and class, because they didn't have to do this, they could have just put their head in the sand. They basically said, okay, we'll leave you alone. We'll tell the rights department that like we're exploring something. But it did what it did. So 80% was me not wanting to go ballistic, go live. I could go public and say, so-and-so person ripped me off, so-and-so person is a crook, liar, and thief. Okay, you're kind of getting into defamation. Now, if it's true, it's not defamation. But there's a way I could convey, hey, I feel there was something that was maybe not proper, or I would do it differently and hold back. So it wasn't also being a pushover. I had to show, like Alexander the Great was kind of crazy. He attacked from the front and that threw off others. They were like, this guy is just, when I went to court, I showed up and I was taking on the president of the Bar Association. They're like, this is not according to script. Like, this guy should not be here by himself. But I still held back. I didn't, as much as I was defending myself, I didn't go and like make a racial slur to like the CEO in San Fran, who then would be like, oh, really? Now it's personal. You know, I was still like, that guy is a great guy. I am sure he cannot be responsible for this, but this is petty, frivolous, and meritless. Yeah, I wanted to say that guy's a big SOB. He's full of it. He was always come across like a charlatan. He's proving to be a charlatan. But I had to hold back. Same thing with my employees. Sometimes I want to tell the staff, my God, I'm an idiot for hiring you and giving you this opportunity. You clearly have no idea what you're doing. What good comes of that? It's like, I have to say, well, what is the role that this person would do really well in? And maybe I should put them in that role instead of this other role where I projected them to be able to do this. So there's a lot of examples. When you're an advertiser, I had an investor recently for months. We want to become partners. We want to become partners. Okay, I'm like open to it. I'm like, we don't need the money, but you need partners in life to go far. You want to go far, go together. You want to go fast, go alone. So I'm like, okay, fine. I'm very transparent. I tell them everything. At the last minute, they're like, well, we're hesitating because of this thing. We would only do this if you kick off the other parties that want to invest. I'm like, no, bro, these other people are unwavering. They want to work with us regardless. You're coming with demands. Like, step off. You're getting off the train. I did not say that. Now, naturally, if they see this video, they're going to know who's who. But I said, hey, I totally get it. I understand. This is why, and I'm kind of passive aggressive. I used to think I'm not, but I admit, I was like, this is why very early in the process, I wanted to highlight this reality so that you had the information to make the best decision for your group. I understand. If things change, please let me know. I don't want it to be like, you piece of crap, you wasted all this time. I slowed down the process for you. Like, what good, why would I do that? You know what I mean? So it's a lot more about holding back. I work with my spouse. 80% of my staying alive and her not killing me or leaving me is what I don't say. Like every day I go, how come she hasn't killed me? I always go, is she going to kill me or is she going to leave me? Which one will come first? I'm sort of kidding. Let's see if she watches this video. Okay, so it's all about that. It's all temperament, serenity now. You know, when I said balance is a destination you never get to, my daughters laugh. They're like, you balance? I go, yes, it's, you gotta practice it. This is therapy, right? Okay, so I will send you guys the video. It's quite good. It's quite entertaining. Oh yeah, and another reason, oh my God, I'm a paranoid person, not by choice, but you have to. Hello, the head of Warner Music is a CEO named Stephen Cooper. Nice gentleman, I'm sure. But Warner Music is owned by like a Ukrainian billionaire named Lev Blavatnik. Really smart guy. Like I look up to him. He's a great investor, really smart, really savvy. Guess who his former employee was? The head of YouTube Music. So I was like, what if they just call each other and go, yeah, kill this guy. Just turn off his channel. Now, YouTube would not do that, of course, because YouTube is neutral and that would be a much bigger problem, but you're paranoid. So I was like, okay, I need to kind of like, it's called a Mexican standoff. Maybe that term should not be used anymore in 2022, but a Mexican standoff is like, you know, there's three people shooting each other. You got to get the right guy. And so I was in the middle of rights holders and YouTube, and I had to show restraint. But sometimes you had to go crazy, and upcoming in legal, I'm going to show you a very, very assassin-like move where there was a company that was just ignoring the law. And I had to go kind of gangster, but really, really like delicately. And then they had to back off. To find out what I did, stick around in a couple shows. Okay, so, and then also, when I talk about the paradox of competition, you're competing for talent. And a lot of you very quickly are going to deal with the number one paradox, which is the paradox of compensation, where younger talent wants you to pay them for their future. So you got to take a leap of faith. And when you meet more experienced veterans, they want you to pay them for their past. And I always bet on youth. So in the end, you're disappointing one or the other. So it's always a balancing act. Now, yes, question. Look, it is true, though, that the best business models are de facto monopolies, Google, AdSense, and all that. Peter Thiel, from a pure economics perspective, is right. We had a crazy advantage by being early. It was not a monopoly. But I think what he's saying is, if you go in a hyper-competitive world, you won't be profitable. So he goes, fine for areas where you do have a bit of an unfair advantage. So he's not wrong. It's just those are hard to find. Because you got to be really early, you got to execute. You know, generally it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When there is profits, there's competition. But that book, I read it when I was flying to Dominican a few years ago. He's not wrong. It's a good book. I will add it to the list of books I pretended to read cover to cover, but that one is a good book. Okay, so when I started WatchMojo, we had two competitors, Revision 3, who produced the Dig Nation show, and Next New Networks. I ended up meeting both their CEOs, Revision 3, Jim Louderback, now runs VidCon. He asked me to speak there. Great, great guy. Lance Padel ran Next New Networks. When I wrote my third book, Lance had sold Next New Networks to YouTube and Google, because Google does not want to deal with human beings. So Next New Networks was like the buffer. And Lance actually wrote the kind of the plug the book in the back. And I did it purposely because not just that it was YouTube, but it was like I always wanted to be on good terms with our competitors. That's what kind of you do as a statesman. You also want to be classy out there. You don't want to be taking shots, petty shots at your competition. It looks bad. Your employees also don't like it. So you really, really have to be classy, but you also have to be a bit of an assassin, but not too much. This is Doug Ivester. He was briefly chairman and CEO of Coke. He didn't last because he actually would brag about, if you see your competitor drowning, he would, quote, get a lime hose and put it in his mouth, end quote. So again, I'm in business school and this guy, I'm like, yeah, this is not the way I would operate. Even if this is the way you think, why say this? You don't get anything from pissing off people like Jeff Hughes, great overall CEO of Time Warner. But in 2010, he said, Netflix, quote, it's a little bit like, is the Albanian army going to take over the world? End quote. First of all, why bash the Albanian army? What did they do here? Nothing. But two, well, let's see what happened. This graph is already outdated, but when they said that, Netflix was trading at 25 bucks. At the end of the decade, the stock was trading at 400. Time Warner viewed Netflix as a fading star, but in the end, because of streaming and Netflix, the market Netflix created, AT&T threw in, Time Warner threw in the towel, sold to AT&T. Fitting, today, AT&T is spinning off Warner and Discovery in a new company. So I don't really think you benefit anything from like embarrassing or trying to embarrass your competition, because you got to fire up your troops. You don't want to fire up the other troops. And your tactics have to change. An excerpt from my third book. When we were like small and had 100,000 subscribers, my focus was on credibility. We were doing top 10 lists. We had to avoid mistakes. We had to make sure that the lists made sense. Now, as we got bigger, I was like, no, we are the authority. So it's fine to maybe push the envelope and take a stand. And then once we got bigger, given where the world was going, I was like, okay, we don't want to be just a faceless robotic channel. We should have a bit more personality, but not too much, because people don't come to WatchMojo for like the quirky creator. They actually come because they're tired of the creator that's a bit spazzy. And then once we got to 10 million subscribers, we were hell-bent on perfection because everybody is insecure. So whenever we made a mistake, and we produced so much content, statistically, we made less mistakes than the New York Times, but on YouTube, you make a mistake, everybody's on you. And then what we realized was, okay, we're getting a bit too big. We're not exactly Scientific American. Let's just go for simplicity. Let's go back to having fun. This is all in a matter of years. You're going to experience this in a matter of months because change is happening much faster. This is a slide where somebody was like, who's your competition? I'm like, look, everybody's our competition. I'm not the guy that goes, there's no competition. Everybody's our competition. You got the big digital media companies like Vice and BuzzFeed. You got the influencers like PewDiePie, Mr. Beast. You got the traditional entertainment. And you got companies in our world creating short shoulder content who themselves, I would presume, said internally, yeah, you know what, let's kind of borrow from the WatchMojo playbook. And you have to bear in mind when it comes to competition innovation is most successful companies really have one, maybe two things they do really well. Google search, but even in media, Wall Street Journal, printed newspaper, Time, printed magazine, TED Talks, in-person events, Huffington Post, online magazine format covering politics, PewDiePie, a YouTube series on Let's Play Gaming. When you try to do too many things, generally you lose a lot of money doing things poorly, but that's the paradox. If you don't get out of your comfort zone, you also shrink. Another paradox. People will always ask you when you meet investors, especially, what inning are we in? Obsessed, like I'm obsessed with sports analogies. What inning are we in? And I go, guys, it's not what inning we are in. It's really like more of a best of 7 series, and some are more early in that series, some are late. Nobody's gonna say that Netflix is in the 2nd inning. It's like game 4. There's still a lot of games to be played, but there's always opportunity. So you guys, yeah, somebody definitely told Google, we're not going to invest in search. We got Yahoo, we got Alta Vista, we don't need Google. So you have to tell that story. Why is it that, no, it's not too late? What is that billion-dollar opportunity? And the reality is content is huge and it's still growing, partly because of this bad boy that creates iPhone, for those dialing in or calling in. This creates a computer and a TV and a radio all in your pocket that you take with you everywhere. Now with 5G, it's just, you gotta stock the shelves. Disney spends $20 billion a year on content. And in aggregate, as much as we talk about digital, traditional is huge. If you actually look at, like, this is pre-COVID, if you actually look at the domestic studio market share, it was massive. And the interesting thing is COVID means this all goes somewhere. Where does it go? Digital. And frankly, the biggest inflection point and accelerant was when TV was overtaken by the internet. This is a moment that, like, my generation of entrepreneurs, like, we were talking about this forever. And it's funny, in my first articles, I always said 2018. My models running my financial analyst ad was 2018. It basically happened in 2019. And so you've already seen print get decimated, radio kind of flatline. The biggest change now is what happened with COVID is there was less live sports for a period, less new production. So whereas a lot of marketers were stuck with their old ways, and they were like, well, we don't really need to change, they finally took the money that they used to spend, let's say, before sports matches or underwriting new shows, and they said, you know what, the audience is online anyway. But we can't put it on Netflix because it's a subscription model only. So let's go spend it on YouTube and Snap. Again, advertising video on demand. So all of a sudden, in the past few years, a sudden gush. This is why YouTube is growing 40% year over year. At their scale, they're going to do $30 billion in 2021. They're growing 40% a year. Do the math. And so you're also seeing a lot of consolidation where companies think that, okay, we're running out of ideas. Disney, who do we go by? Marvel, LucasArts. AT&T, we're going to take Warner and we're going to go merge it with Discovery. And so you're seeing, actually, ironically, Viacom and CBS in 2000, one company. They decided to spin off to two companies. They ran out of ideas, like, let's get back together. Okie dokie. So you're seeing this massive period of consolidation where a few companies will be owning 99% of brands that matter, because the big media companies now no longer say, ooh, we're a monopoly, because look at big tech. And then big tech is like, well, we got all this cash. Why don't we just go buy these companies? And so this is only going to accelerate. Ad dollars shifting to AVOD, we've said this quite a bit. And then the other thing that is dramatically changing media, where I think is a big opportunity if you're building apps and products, is the so-called creator economy, which, okay, is a buzzword and whatever. But the fact that individuals could become storytellers and entrepreneurs, and basically with a lot of repetition and a lot, take down the establishment. I was particularly in a good mood that day when I wrote "Bring Down the Establishment" with a Joker thumbnail of burning down, whatever. And that article, you should read the one. Like, maybe the "Bring Down the Establishment" was a bit more rant than anything else. But if you have time, read the "Hollywood as We Know It Is Over," because it just takes you through the biggest changes affecting the media and entertainment industry. And all right, remember YouTube and Netflix, those disruptors, they're getting disrupted themselves. YouTube is freaking out over TikTok. This is not really accurate, but according to at least one source, TikTok does generate more traffic than Google. Unheard of. Netflix, no longer the king of the road, its stock fell 25% in a day, still a great long-term bet. I mean, could you imagine the growth in Asia? Like, Netflix is 200 million subscribers. They might have 10 million subscribers. Nobody's in China outside of Chinese companies. I'll never forget when I went to Beijing. I was like, hey, why is my internet down? I can't log into Gmail. Why is Google? I was like, oh, I forgot where I am. None of these websites are here, you know, so it's kind of an eye-opener. But Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, and all those, they're going to have 50, 60, 70 million subscribers there at some point. You're talking about 400 or 500 million subscribers at some point. But it's no longer the only kid in town. You got Jeff Bezos and his gazillions with Prime Video, Apple Plus, Apple TV, Disney. So ultimately, this is an article I read 2006, one of the 100 investors who turned me down, rightfully, read IBC, Josh Kopelman, and I read this and it stuck with me. It was basically, he goes, we love investing in technologies and business models that are able to shrink existing markets. If your company can take $5 of revenue from a competitor for every dollar you earn, let's talk. Right? Because what the internet does is what the internet is doing is it bursts these bubbles of bloated inefficiency. How does GE go from the leading badass company? No, it's not because they did not hire me. That was probably their best decision. It's because everybody ultimately, human nature, psychology, sins and virtues, human nature does get lazy, does get slow, does get complacent, and it creates an opportunity for the next generation of entrepreneurs, right? Okay, so that is it today for strategy, competition, innovation. There should be a lot of lessons that you guys apply to what you're doing. What you are building has to be the nightmare for your incumbent, established, leading competitors in your marketplace. Don't tell me there's no competition. It's BS. There's absolutely more competition than you could even dream of. But how is your product going to destroy their empire? That's how you have to think in business. And here's the best part. Before you know it, you actually want to be in a position where there's a kid in a basement plotting to take you down. The worst thing you want is for nobody to want to steal your lunch. That means you're in a crappy industry, running a crappy company. Cool? All right. Uplifting, I hope. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so fair question. And to be perfectly transparent, Klarna is in the bucket of investments that I invested at later stages. So I have three types of private investments. So I have private and public. I like stocks, but on the private, there are the early stage companies that are seed, very early, not even local, they're through my network, North American. Then there are funds I invest in, like fellow investors, oftentimes who turn me down, or fellow entrepreneurs who got burnt out, but have a network and they go out and become investors. And I'm like, okay, I'm hedging. I don't necessarily want to be investing myself chasing entrepreneurs. So I invest in other funds. Generally then, those funds get opportunities to invest through SPVs, special purpose vehicles, in pre-IPO companies. So Klarna, to answer your question, a couple of years ago, years ago when I started WatchMojo, there was an entrepreneur named Max Levchin. He was one of the PayPal guys. He merged his company with Elon Musk in '99 to build PayPal. So he launched Slide. Slide wasn't a big success, but he's a really smart kid. He's like a Russian, Ukrainian, I think he's Russian. He's like a Russian Jewish kid who's got like a really interesting story, and I always followed him. And I said, oh, what's this new company he's doing called Affirm? So I was like, well, what's Affirm? And Affirm, whose shares I own on the, because it's IPO'd since, I was like, oh, Affirm is in the buy now, pay later space, which I was like, could be a gimmick, but I could see how younger generation, and I used to work at Visa, so I know the credit card world pretty good. And I was like, hey, this buy now, pay later is going to be an interesting space. But Klarna, massive, I believe it's Swedish. Yeah, so Klarna is not yet publicly traded. There's Afterpay, which I think is Australian, which got bought by Square or PayPal. And then there was Affirm. So I basically was tracking both. When Affirm did an IPO, it's part of my more growth aggressive holdings, which is very volatile compared to like Pushta and RBC and Bank of America stocks, which is, but I was like, there's going to be one or two companies that are going to win. a firm I bought some shares in, and through one of my funds, one of the guys was like, look, through a special purpose vehicle, you can invest in Klarna's. So I invested before it was super well known, but it was not, I don't want to take credit. And I got to update that website because even Hootsuite, people are like, wow, you invested in Hootsuite. I'm like, when Hootsuite started, I was living in a refrigerator box in the back alley. I did not have money to invest. So that also is more late stage. But my thinking, it's very pragmatic. I go, these are companies that if they file for an IPO, I would invest in their public stock. So I'm fine to invest in a late stage Series C, Series D, Series E. But I do think that the buy now, pay later is going to have a lot of consolidation. So like a firm and Klarna could merge, and there's going to be a lot of acquisition like Square or PayPal buying Afterpay. And then there's also global. So it's like a firm has stock, it could go and buy the #1 player in Latin America, #1 player in Africa. So I kind of looked at it like that. I like the space quite a bit, but I think it's going to be more of a consolidation play than standalone companies. Like, I don't think any of these companies is going to kill Visa. You know what I mean? I don't think these companies are going to kill JP Morgan. I think it's just more, it's something that does not make sense for credit card companies to do because credit cards make a ton of money. So they're going to resist doing it. And then eventually, they're going to have no choice because a lot of younger, not just millennials, Gen Y, Gen Alpha, they're going to be like, we don't want to use a credit card. I want to buy this jacket that paid $20 over 10 payments. Any other questions? Okay, so you mentioned a great question. So the question for those calling in is like, not all companies turn out like GE. Sometimes you have actually companies like Amazon that pivot, expand. You mentioned Google, but they also do fail. Well, one, that's it. One, and you said culture. So rightfully, culture is the key. That's why culture eats strategy, to quote Peter Drucker. But Amazon is led by its founder, Jeff Bezos, who stepped down as CEO, but his role is the same. He's basically executive chairman. Maniacal founders are not in it for the title, the house, the girlfriend, the BS. They are just driven crazy for some other things. I realize every day there's something that bothers me. It's small, but it just bothers me, and I'm looking to fix a problem, solve it. That's what drives us. I'm not comparing myself to Bezos and those guys. Google, Larry and Sergey have not been CEO for a while, but they're not really involved, but they're still around where they got a sense of pride, and they're willing to make big bets. If they fail, it's like a rounding error. It's like you leave an extra tip. It helps that person a lot more than you. You don't think about it. It's the same thing. To them, it's like a rounding error to nothing, Whereas a GE, what happens? You got executives who are brought on, and they become very paranoid. They want to protect their title. They want to protect their purview. Oh, I'm deciding this. We can't do that. Mark Zuckerberg is a flawed individual. He just wants to get bigger, better, faster, quicker. He doesn't care about the politics. Like, he does care about some politics. Jeff Bezos doesn't care who gets credit. He's just like, we're moving into health. We're going to take over this space. So it boils down to culture. It boils down to leadership. We have a hashtag, live and learn, at the company. I don't want to swear. I promised I would not swear. We F up all the time. I'm not like, put out your hand, give me the knife, I'm cutting your finger off. Nobody gets thrown off the train. And you have to have a culture where you could kind of break stuff and you don't kill people about it, right? So I think what happens is that the GEs at a lot of companies, it gets so clear. When I was at RBC, yes, I was naive, same way that I was telling GE, I want to run your company in 20 years, which sounded crazy. I also thought when I was at RBC, customer service, I was like, I'd like to run the RBC in 20 years. And I felt that I could do in 20 years, like with a lot of grooming and talent. But what I realized, I said, this culture makes no sense for me. Because at Visa, I was like, I could solve every problem the first time a client calls, but that's not what the culture is based on. It's based around, let's take this client and it's like a mall. You go up the elevator and then you got to go around because they want foot traffic. But to send a client into a maze, to basically break them down so they stop calling to fix the problem, hoping they go away, is no way to treat your client. So I was like, if this is emblematic of this company, and I'm not bashing RBC, I'm bashing banks. I was like, I don't want to waste my life in this freaking organization, right? So yeah, it boils down to leadership, it boils down to culture. You have to be intellectually curious. You have to be proud, not hubris. So Google has really messed up, but I saw firsthand when they realized Google Video was never going to succeed, they didn't give into hubris. They said, let's just go and buy the #1 player, YouTube, but they were also driven by fear because YouTube was the #2 search engine after Google. So it was self-preservation. You know, if let's say Microsoft would have bought YouTube, maybe YouTube would not be as big in video, but if YouTube became a affordable search engine, risking Google, that's a bigger problem for Google. So absolutely, it's culture, but that's one where it starts from the top. You need a leader who is just always driven, but is also not killing people when things go bad. Because that's the thing. What did I tell you? You have to be intellectually honest. And, you know, rear view mirror management is not helpful for anybody.